Well, I am here with Sarah Breskman Cosme, and Sarah has been practicing QHHT for well over a decade now. She's had hundreds of clients. She has achieved the level 3 training within the QHHT. Uh, she can explain the training regimen. And also, she has written, I think it's 3 books or 4 books dealing with her QHHT topics that have come up. And she has addressed Atlantis, ancient Egypt. And I'm very happy to have her back on Exopolitics today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, yes, you definitely have been doing quite a bit of work over the years. So you want to again just maybe summarize the number of clients that you've had in QHHT and your training?
Gosh, probably like at least I mean definitely over 1,000 clients. I mean, I do this almost every single day basically when I'm not traveling or doing something else for work. But yes, I do see quite a lot of clients.
Well, that's a lot, over 1,000, and of course, those clients. Why don't you describe the process where you get those clients to get into a state of mind where they can then begin to communicate with their higher self and retrieve these past life memories.
Sure. Well, actually, in a QHHT session, in the beginning of the session, the practitioners trained in QHHT um, ask the client to put a bubble of protection around them. So that's part of the QHHT protocol. And the practitioner regresses the client after putting this bubble of protection around them. And then, after the regression and after they go through past life or lives, then the practitioner asks to speak directly with their higher self. So, the practitioner trained in QHHT understands to access the higher portion of the client. And that way, they can find out everything about that client and they can find out like who they really are, and they can even help that client heal themselves. And Dolores Cannon is the one that invented this after so many years of research. And actually, there's a lot of protection in place for the client, for the practitioner. It's Dolores herself, and she's not here anymore, but she she was able to help like so many thousands and thousands of people through her method, and people continue to use QHHT to heal themselves. I mean, miraculously, like find out about who they really are and things like that. And the gift continues to grow. But it is a very beautiful and beneficial practice, actually, if you do practice QHHT.
Yes, that healing aspect is of great interest to me. I know, actually the first interview we did, we discussed the case of Jen Sullivan and how you when you regressed her through the higher self, she was able to get these past life memories of Atlantis, and that healed her of some kind of brain condition. I mean, maybe you remember more clearly.
Yeah.
So you just want to explain how that works, where the QHHT actually heals people of physical ailments?
Sure, it's really profound actually, but what is happening is the person is quieting their mind and they're tuning very deeply into themselves. So they're listening for their gut or whatever you want to call that part of you, that aspect of yourself that knows everything about you. And you're speaking directly with that part of yourself that is connected to all different higher layers or benevolent layers of yourself. What happens is we have these issues like physical issues and ailments for a reason. And those are messages that if we tune really deeply into ourselves, we can get the message and then it can be released and healed. And a person can heal sometimes instantly if they get the message. Um, it happens all the time in these QHHT sessions. What happened with Jen was that she received the message, and the message was really that her and I were supposed to uncover this information, and this was part of a past life trauma in that originated from a different lifetime. Upon her really realizing what the very root cause of this physical issue was, it could be released. And quickly, right after she realized that, it started to drain behind her left eye. And when she went back to her team of specialists, she was healed. But I'm not the only one that practices this, that has had, seen or witnessed profound healing like that. People heal in the same way, even without a session. It's really just listening very deeply to themselves and finding out what the message is that the physical body is sending them. It's really nothing other than that.
Yes, I remember reading a book by Carolyn Miss, I think it's called Anatomy of the Spirit, where she talked about all physical illness is a opportunity to communicate with that illness and find out what's causing it. And so, she definitely emphasizes the psychosomatic, and it seems that QHHT does something similar where the higher self is consulted, and whatever it is that that person is suffering from can be healed, because now that, as you said, that higher aspect of the self is communicating, well, what's really causing that chronic migraine, or what's causing, the fatigue, or whatever the illness is.
Right. And that's exactly the point because even though, like right now, we all know we're being bombarded by toxins, by poisons in our water and things like that that are not beneficial to us, we still have this sovereignty within ourselves. Our bodies are still miraculous machines. We still can tune into ourselves and realize that we have control actually over our environment and that nothing actually happens to us physically by accident. Everything is just a greater teacher. It's like a teaching tool. And yes, it definitely sucks. And I'm sure you know about how hard it is when you feel physically ill and you're going through some type of experience like that. And it definitely doesn't minimize it. But all these things are teaching tools on some level. And we have the sovereignty, and our bodies are miraculous. They can heal completely, giving it not only just the belief that it can, but just the ability, the, recognition that it can do so.
Yes, I'd like to kind of, like, get you to maybe tell us, like, you've had 1,000, more than 1,000 clients. Uh, how often do people report back saying that, they've been healed because of their communication with the higher self, or them hearing what their higher self has to say?
This is really how it works. For some people, and I don't know how many exactly, but for some people, the healing can be instant. For instance, and this is such a great question, if I'm asking clients' higher self, what is the root cause of, say, they have a brain condition? What is the root cause of their brain condition? And the higher self says, oh, the root cause is from a past trauma, or it's from this life where they, you know, something in the past and they actually don't need it anymore. They just don't really realize that they're energetically still holding on to this. They can release it now. And I ask questions like, what are the lessons behind this issue? Have they learned it? Has it served a purpose yet? Then if the higher self says, oh yes, it already served its purpose. They already learned all they needed to learn. They already do all the practices they need to do, then it can instantly be released and healed and translated instantly into the physical body. It's more of like an awareness, like an aha moment where you realize, oh, wow, I no longer need to carry this around with me. And you realize how divine and sovereign you are and that you have the ability for that. Then there's the instance where I'll ask the higher self, what is the root cause of their brain condition? And they say, well, so and so keeps thinking these negative thoughts about themselves or whatever it is, or, they're holding on to something from the past. The environment is only the trigger. So sometimes, like, a person could have been like using their cell phone too close to their head, and that was the trigger. But the root cause was that whatever it is, like holding on to, they don't love themselves or whatever it could be. A person realizing that, I would ask, well, do they need to learn anything else from it? Has it served the purpose? And the higher self may say, no, they need to start loving themselves. They need a practice of self love. And it could be released now that they have this awareness, maybe in a week or two or whatever, if they do this practice. Then there's the type that are not going to heal. And this is what commonly happens in these QHAC sessions like this. I'll ask the higher self, with my client under hypnosis, what is the very root cause of this brain condition? And the higher self will say, oh, well, the root cause is, like, say, not loving themselves. So then I will ask, has this served its purpose and everything? And the higher self will say, no, we will definitely not heal this because we have been putting signs and symbols. There's even a book on her bedside that says, like, how to love yourself. We've been like telling her, we've been like putting messages everywhere, and she doesn't listen. She's not getting the message. So there is no way we will heal this. And then, of course, I'll ask, what exactly does she need to do for it to be healed? Something like that. So you can see it's 3 different types of healing. And it really comes down to the person. It's not that the practitioner of QHHT is not actually the healer. They're just the practitioner. The client heals themselves when they're ready, when they've received the message.
So with the client going through this process of there being communication with the higher self, what happens with the ego self? I mean, how do you kind of like get that out of the way so that the client is communicating with, or what role does the therapist play in kind of facilitating that communication with the higher self? Is it, does it involve the client, or is it like the therapist first establishes connection with the higher self?
Right. And that's such a great question because the therapist, the QHHT practitioner, is very trained to know what is the higher consciousness and what is like a lower self or the ego. And essentially, it not only comes down to resonance, but it comes down in frequency, but it comes down to how the higher self or the ego is speaking through the client. The higher self is an all loving, all knowing perspective of this particular client. So, this higher self, which the intention is always to ask for the higher version of a person anyway in these sessions, the higher self is so loving. It knows exactly what this person needs. Sometimes there can be certain types of ego interference or like a lower energy. It's rare, but it does happen. And it's up to the practitioner to realize, oh, that's not very loving. I can tell this is not the higher self. And it becomes like very easy for the practitioner to discern. I mean, basically, if the ego is coming through, they'll be very critical of the person because that's usually how the ego communicates. And the practitioner, after doing a couple of these sessions, would have a feel for this pretty early on.
Okay. So can you explain to us the dynamic of a typical QHHT session where you have the higher self uh, being asked questions by the QHHT therapist, and then you have some of these past life memories and the figures involved in those past lives also being asked questions by the therapist. So, yeah, can you just explain that process?
Yeah, sure. So so in a paying client session, it's very different than when, for me personally, when I'm using a hypnosis subject, that there is no money involved. It is like for trade. I'm trying to get information. So I do ask all the questions I want. And those are the sessions that I use for my work. This is very different than a client coming in who paid money and, they're asking only their own questions. I would never ask, my own questions in a paying client session. The way it goes about is in the beginning, they come, they talk about their life, and you get to understand what it is that they are really questioning and what they would like to explore further. I do have paying clients that do fly to me to go deeper into technology from Atlantean times. And they want to see like different technology, the way it was used before, because you can explore your own past life in some of these places, and like people could see how to decorate like some of these temples, or how did things happen in Egypt, the way that it happened, or things like that. So you go through the basic past life, and the scene that, if it's a paying client, it would be the scene that their higher self wants them to see. And then you ask to speak directly with the higher self, with the higher part of this client. And then you would ask their questions. Maybe they have questions like, why have I always had this dream, this recurring dream, or anything. Like they can find out anything. And then you would ask about the physical issues that they have. And essentially, it's extremely beneficial. Uh, you know, if you haven't had like a QHHT session, you just wouldn't know like how beneficial it is, or the parameters of it, or, you know, basically what it is, so to speak.
Hmm. Okay. Um, so with these past life memories where a person remembers, for example, just say, and here I'm just citing an example from
Yeah.
one of the Dolores Cannon books where she talks about the Essenes, and she discusses these Essenes that lived in these remote locations, through a client. But she would ask the Essene, or the person having the past life, where they had an experience in the past life as one of the Essenes, she would ask that Essene, that person, questions as opposed to the higher self.
Exactly. So if you're working on, like, say, a story of a certain past life, and this person's past life is a certain personality, then you would speak directly to that personality. And I do that when I'm working on books. So I had, like this client, when she was deep under hypnosis, remember that firsthand perspective of being a Native American. Cherokee chief, and I learned so much about history through this personality. Same with, the information I received on Atlantis. It's from somebody's memories, essentially. So I'm really just a researcher, and I'm just researching people's memories when it comes to like different time periods, because I feel like so much of our history is lost, and there are still recorded like eyewitness accounts of our ancient history through our subconscious memories, and all this stuff is resurfacing. And it's an amazing way, actually, an amazing modality to actually utilize and find out more about like eyewitness accounts. Of course, memory can vary here and there, and that's why I use such a broad range of people, and I have multiple hypnosis subjects for that reason.
Well, I know as a researcher trying to understand various aspects of our history, that you want to get as many sources of information as possible. And when I came across the QHHT books of Dolores Cannon, I was really delighted to see that she gave a perspective on historical events, from that perspective of the individuals that lived them. And so this to me was just another source of information about history, that I could then compare and contrast with other sources, whether I'm talking whistleblowers, contactees, historical records. But I think as a political scientist, what we try and do is get as many sources as possible, and kind of like say, okay, these sources, they vary in reliability and accuracy, but we can use them all to find out or understand these historical events. So yeah, so I think QHHT is a fabulous way of getting first-hand testimony of people who remember living these lives in ancient times.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's one of the things that makes you so wonderful personally because you do research by having so many different perspectives. It's just, it's so, there's not much to gain from just having the same perspective over and over again. But by looking and investigating multiple perspectives, and sometimes they don't agree, it's great to like, since we're all in this together, it's great to like see what other people believe that, you might not come across if you only listen to your own perspective.
Yes, it is very important, especially when it comes to topics like my topic, extraterrestrial life, that it's just kind of shrouded in mystery, and so we need those multiple sources. Now Dolores Cannon, she talked quite a bit about extraterrestrials, and again, it was from the perspective of these individuals that were having past life memories and recalling uh, interacting with extraterrestrials or lives or as extraterrestrials. So yeah, I mean, do you want to kind of comment about that?
Sure. Yes. You can actually find out about a past life, and it happens a lot where a person will remember that they had I have to quote past life because it's sometimes parallel, sometimes current. In a sense, everything's happening in this now moment. So to call it past is kind of tricky, but people have memories. Or they can tune in to another version of themselves that's like completely living in a different place or extraterrestrial, whatever you want to call it, because we are so multidimensional. And Dolores was really just the pioneer when it came to that. It was difficult for her to really go against the grain and be this pioneer, but she really did open the door for like questioning things and allowing for other perspectives and taking her work as research because she never said, "This is what you have to believe." She just said, "This is what I found out," as a researcher and reporter. And I see this happen in my own work. And so I do basically the same thing where I am researching and reporting. And well, for me, I do access the higher aspect of a client when I'm speaking with like a collective or something, because I'm asking to speak with the higher version, the higher part of the client, and it is very fascinating to learn about things. Like it's interesting to learn about these other collectives, and I'm definitely not perfect, and no one has to believe everything that I'm researching or uncovering. But I feel like to listen to other people's perspectives are very helpful. And I think that, if people know that I am asking for the higher version of a person, not like, please let some negative version of the person come talk to me. I never would do that. And I don't see any benefit in that.
So, in your thousand or more sessions with different clients, have you come across clients that recall being extraterrestrials or recall interacting with extraterrestrials in some situation?
Definitely. I can't even put a number to it, but many people realize things that they are incarnated now and they hardly spend any time in this on this earth. They're just here as a volunteer. They know they're a star seed. Some people know they are more like a hybrid being. Some people have interacted with extraterrestrials in dream states. Some people know that they're receiving lots of messages from different groups of extraterrestrials. Some people know that they're in their specific like locations because they're filtering through like benevolent energy that's just waking up their family and waking up their city even. So, I mean, I would say probably everyone has probably had some form of contact or communication with some type of extraterrestrial, even people that don't have any memory of this.
So, how would that kind of happen? I mean, are we talking about the person's higher self saying, "Oh, yeah, you were a star seed in the Pleiades, and this is what you did there," or is it that the person remembers, "Oh, yes, I lived in the Pleiades, and this is what I remember happening there, and I remember my wife and da da da."
Yeah, both. So sometimes a person can remember in such great detail what it was like to live in the Pleiades, why they're incarnated now too, or sometimes they just talk all about like the Pleiades or, you know, say they're from Arcturus or, there's so many different groups of extraterrestrials. It's so vast and surprising at how vast these memories are. They're not just like these small, just only this group. There's so many.
Hmm. And we know that there are many different extraterrestrial groups, but the main ones seem to be that people experience are like the gray extraterrestrials, the reptilian extraterrestrials, and the kind of human looking extraterrestrials. I mean, just the three broad, I guess, genotypes. So how, in your kind of experiences with different clients, I mean, do there seem to be a preponderance of one kind of extraterrestrial interacting with people, or more?
So that's a great question. It usually seems that a person um, is putting out a specific frequency. So when their frequency is like, say, like of a higher vibration, they in general attract a higher vibration of extraterrestrial. Um, and when they're really connected with, like, say, their ascension, then they would, and they're connected and they're in alignment with their ascension, they would be more in alignment with a benevolent type of extraterrestrial that would wish to help them on this ascension because the ascension is important for the rest of the universe, so to speak. If it's just like anything, if a person is really focused on negativity and is in fear, they open themselves up like they are sharing that vibration of fear, and they would open themselves up for a more negative type of experience in some senses. But it does seem that there are like certain factions that are not benevolent, that's for sure. And some that have, you know, um, worked with people against their will, and some that have made trades with like governments and things against their will. And it seems that in people's memories or the higher self has said that this is a very real thing. But what also seems to be the case, and I'm just going by my own information, is that it seems that for the most part, some of these negative factions have really been stopped to some degree, and they really aren't happening at the level that they used to be happening. And there is so much protection for a lot of these like star seeds, these people that are working on themselves in alignment for the ascension, and that, um, to be in fear of something like this happening now is sort of like I don't get that in my sessions. It seems that that has been dismantled, to a large degree. It still does happen in these, like, I guess that you would say a subset of a group, a government group, and there are the hybridization programs that are not run by extraterrestrials. People do seem to have experiences with that. But as far as extraterrestrial contact that's happening now, um, it's I have not seen a negative extraterrestrial contact really so much happening right now as perhaps there was more of this in the past. But I really don't see that. But when it comes to different groups of extraterrestrials, there are so many different types. Like if you take the grays, for instance, that's calling like so many different extraterrestrials gray. That's there's just one broad term for maybe over 400 or who knows how many different. I'm not really sure how many different types of gray extraterrestrials there are, but there are the negative grays, of course, that would like humanity to stop evolving in their organic timeline. They would um, like it if humanity just starts to follow that technological ascension path. And the reason they would like this so much is because that would mean that they could continue to exist. And so if you notice there's a lot less interaction with them as humanity realizes that they are sovereign and they follow the organic ascension pathway, they have less and less interaction with those types of grays. And also, I've noticed, and I'm just saying from my own, experience that there are, well, with clients, that there are ascended grays. And so sometimes ascended grays would also be called grays, but they have realized that they went too far with their technology and they are working to actually help humanity. Just because somebody's called gray doesn't mean they fit into one category. So it's just like humans. Not all humans are the same. We all have different like levels and things that we're trying to do. So it seems that there is like a very real group of what you would call ascended grays. And then there's like more benevolent extraterrestrials that are actively working to help humanity by communicating with them. So at least that's been my experience. But the thing is, you never have to just believe me. You can just check in with your own divine self. Everyone is a divine sovereign being, and they just see how things resonate with them. And you would know the difference too if you were contacted by something that was malevolent because you would feel it on some level. So everybody I guess, is learning to practice discernment, and that's very important. And it's really important to receive the messages from yourself first.
So, in your sessions, have you come across greys that are using your clients like a telephone?
So, yes, but I'm glad you asked that because whenever I speak with any extraterrestrial or group, I'm asking to speak with the highest version of a person. And that's how I learned about like what I call the ascended grays and other different extraterrestrials that are higher versions of my client. So it's not like I'm actually speaking with something that's not my client. They're connected to my client as a higher version. And there does seem to be some ascended type of grays, which is really great to come across because that does show that as humanity as a whole must have been able to question things themselves and they must have been able to ascend. So, in my mind, it's a really good thing to know that the negative agenda didn't really work. So, that's kind of how I see this.
So, in terms of the higher self of an individual, what is the connection with these kind of like, more positive grays or ascended grays as you describe them? I mean, does the higher self say, hey, this is an aspect of you that I want you to learn about? I mean, how does that work?
So, when I'm speaking with the higher self, some higher aspects of the client can, if it's okay with the higher self, can speak through the client. And those would be the higher aspects that are actually usually working with the client in their current vibration. So some people do have experiences with like a higher version or an ascended gray that is actually working with them in this now moment. That's the only reason they would be like attracting that, if that makes sense. So it's resonating with the client. The higher self would is allowing this to show like what is actually being communicated with the client. But the thing is, it's pretty easy to tell the difference between, like a negative gray agenda and uh, like a higher agenda because one would be promoting, like not, putting a chip in your brain, and the other would be promoting like becoming your own divine being. And it's pretty easy to tell, like which one you're speaking with because if they're like, well, work on yourself like spiritually and keep, doing all these spiritual things, like why would they do that if they were trying to harm, the client? It wouldn't really make any sense.
Have you come across clients who have had interactions with these negative gray extraterrestrials who have in some way abused them, taken advantage of them? Have you come across that?
I I personally haven't. What's wondering if I have. Um No, more so that sometimes there are like smaller grays that are just like worker bees. So sometimes like another benevolent extraterrestrial will be communicating or fine tuning someone. They'll see this as a memory, or the higher self will share this with them that they've been getting tune ups. And a lot of times they'll see small grays or grays that are actually like helping this other higher extraterrestrial perform some like tune up. So sometimes they're just like workers, like worker bees. It depends on what types, you're speaking
Mhm.
about because there are so many different types. And even like when people remember different things that went on in ancient Egypt, they'll sometimes see grays like working as like helping, somebody, not really having much of a personality there, just being like sort of a hired hand, so to speak.
Okay, so gray extraterrestrials are kind of like uh, described by many people as tricksters, master manipulators. So how do we know, or how do you know that when one of these greys says, "Well, I'm an ascended grey," and how do you know that that's not one of these tricksters that's trying to kind of pull a fast one over you and your client?
Well, that's a great question. And actually, it's pretty easy because in a session, I'm only asking to speak with the higher version of that person. And also, you could tell based on the frequency or, you know, um, frequency doesn't lie. And also, you can tell just by on what kind of information they're giving to the client. If they're saying things like, it's really important to do shadow work, don't forget, to, work on these things for yourself. And they're saying things like that. You can just tell the difference between the messages. I mean, um, yeah, it's pretty like simple and it's just actions speak louder than, you know, anything else.
Is it because the QHHT sessions are oriented towards, firstly establishing a connection with that person's higher self, establishing, as you said, a protective bubble. So, there's a kind of like, I guess, a spiritual component here, and that, as you were saying, you only get highly evolved beings, or you get extraterrestrials that are more evolved, that kind of like step in to communicate with the higher self, or
Yeah,
the higher self.
exactly. And And really, that is one of the reasons why many people that practice QHHT um, have a even have a hard time understanding that there might be negative extraterrestrials because they would never ask to speak with any. They wouldn't. It wouldn't be a concern since it's not something that they're trying to have access to. And
Mhm,
because of the protection, they are asking to speak with a higher version of that client.
mhm. Okay, so in your sessions, I mean, you've encountered these ascended greys that are wanting to help your clients achieve their highest potential and give them advice and so forth. Um, and you haven't come across kind of like negative greys in your sessions. So how do you know that there's a negative grey agenda?
Oh, I've asked about it. I've asked the higher consciousness just about like what's happening on the planet and um just I ask questions like that all the time. Like tell me about what we're really up against, and so that's how I've learned because I'll ask a ton of questions from the higher self. Just that's how I learned about like the negative grace and from the higher self and just the different agendas because there are a lot of agendas, unfortunately. But in a sense, this is a chance for us all to remember that we are sovereign beings and we have so much power within ourselves, and we don't have to give our power away. And there really isn't like a need to be in fear, worrying that something could happen to us when even as you look into like just how people can heal themselves miraculously and how people are, these really powerful beings. We're just becoming more aware of our power and we're becoming more discerning as to like how not to give our power away and how not to start fearing and open ourselves up to this fear when really the power is within and we can tune in and we are like connecting with this divine aspect of ourselves, a lot more these days.
Right. So I wanted to ask about the hybrids that is part of this kind of grey agenda that people like David Jacobs talked about in a number of books. That his view was that these hybrid greys were being created by the Greys, and that this was the agenda to flood the planet at some point with these hybrids who, because they were psychically enhanced in some way, would eventually become dominant and would eventually replace Homo sapiens. So, do you know anything about this kind of grey agenda involving the hybrids?
Well, I've actually never heard of that person before and that type of agenda, but I will say there's been so many different types of agendas. But really, the war is just on information and sovereignty. Like, you can see it right now with so many people just realizing that they have the power within themselves and they don't have to search for something outside of themselves. But I have heard about the agenda to produce these hybrids within certain government factions, which is kind of like different, but it's not really working out to the way that it seems like they were hoping to. They were hoping to create, I guess, like an army of people that would help control the population. But with the beautiful galactic beings that are overseeing this ascension program, there have been so many agendas that have been shot down. There have been so many things that just aren't really working out because there's so much power behind every human, and every human has tons of like help right now.
Mhm. Well, there have been some people in the kind of like exopolitics community that have accused you of supporting the grey agenda. So, what do you say to that?
Well, I mean, I'm not, supporting the negative gray agenda. So, that's just unfortunate. But I mean, anybody that follows me or reads my books can easily see, that I'm very passionate about promoting the organic, like, timeline of humanity. And I'm passionately helping people to really learn how they can find the power within. And I think as like just part of this whole movement to help one another, that it is really helpful to just really, just all be in this together. Like, I don't think we have to like fight one another. And I think we should just all really support one another, whether or not it's like a different opinion, because that's exactly what you'll get anywhere. It's just different opinions. So, yeah, I'm not supporting that, but I do understand why maybe if someone didn't know, they might think that, and maybe I don't resonate with everyone, and that's fine, but just I am not supporting that.
Okay. So let's kind of like flip this over a little bit and look at the human extraterrestrial agenda. And and you're actually going to be part of a webinar that I'm co-hosting, or you're going to be part of a panel discussion I'm going to have on a webinar with George Cavassalis on June 28. And we're going to be discussing dilemma of a Star Trek future. And that webinar is kind of premised on the idea that there are human governments, we're talking Space Force, Space Command, that are working with these human-looking extraterrestrials to create a Star Trek future. And it's assumed that, this is a good thing, we should embrace it. But some people are suspicious. They say, well, why should we all of a sudden kind of like embrace this ancient conflict between human extraterrestrials out there and the greys and the reptilians? So, why should we become part of that? So, yeah, any thoughts about that?
Well, I just think it comes down to frequency and trusting yourself and to trust how you feel about it, because one person might have a different opinion than someone else, and they totally can just trust, themselves. But when people do look into certain timelines, they do see us becoming more of like working more closely with other, extraterrestrials. They see this and they see us like going to different places and being more spacefaring. They see this, whether or not that will happen or not, or whatever is is up to, I guess, each individual and what they choose for their, for themselves. But really, it just comes down to asking yourself those questions when the time comes. But the more we develop things like our intuition, our ability to speak telepathically, our ability to like start communicating with our star family, it allows us and gives us other abilities and other access to more of like the universe at large, and it helps us actually know more about what's going on, and in that way nobody could ever tell you, something that wasn't good for you and you would believe it. You'd have access to way more power and way more abilities.
I mean, you mentioned star family. I think that's a very important concept. I know I've spoken in the past about an experience I had in 1985 where I saw, I think my star family, I saw like two or three beings that were like these blue, white, humanoid shaped lights, figures standing at the foot of my bed during a particularly emotional period in my life. And I've been recently reconnecting with that because I've gone through a health crisis. And what I've found is that the more I connect with that, the better I feel and my health is improving. So to me, it's like, wow, if you consciously connect with your star family, you start healing.
Mhm. Yeah, because you're allowing them to work with you by being open, by opening your mind and understanding that, especially because you've already realized that they're beneficial and benevolent, and allowing this healing to happen. This kind of thing can be beneficial to anyone that connects with their star family. And sometimes, your star family will instantly heal you, or they'll be doing tune-ups and if you happen to see like a gray anywhere involved, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have like a negative agenda. It could just be there like a worker bee, but you yourself would know, you would feel or sense you know, or know on some level whether this was the case or not. And you could be your own sovereign being and know, if it wasn't a good situation for you.
Have you come across that, um, like the clients connecting with their staff families and reporting on that?
A lot, a lot. And people are realizing that their star family sometimes connects with them and takes like their soul essence to where they originate from. And they find it very healing to reconnect with their star family. People can find great benefit in doing this. But
Hmm.
it's like, they would have to move away from all the fear and programming that those beings, just because they look different than you, are, negatively oriented, because you yourself would know the difference internally and how you feel.
So, if a person is watching this interview and they say, well, that sounds really cool. I want to get in touch with my star family, but I have no idea how to do it. Could QHHT help that person?
Oh, definitely. They could definitely use QHHT as a method to, find out more about their star family or the higher versions or aspects of themselves. But you could also just ask. You can ask for them to come and help you, or, ask when you're waking up in the morning or when you're falling asleep at night.
Great. Well, are there any things that you're doing right now that you'd like my audience to know about? I know you got an Egypt trip coming up, and I was on that last year. It was a fabulous experience with my wife and I. So I know you're doing it again now. So yeah, anything you want to say about your Egypt tours or anything else that you're working on?
Well, I love the Egypt trip so much because these temples and these pyramids hold so much ancient information that actually, when you go inside, it helps you activate certain things in your dormant, DNA, and it's very beneficial. It also helps you connect with different star families. But I've been learning a lot about Atlantis right now, and it seems like a lot of people have a lot of memories from Atlantis. I did do my first book on Atlantis, and I'm redoing it right now. But people are remembering these ancient ways that were so beneficial to us like crazy. I mean, even just the ancient way from Atlantis of placing like a piece of gold on yourself. When the sun would hit the gold, gold acts as like it actually reacts with our body. And so it can be very beneficial to not burn yourself, but put in the early morning, put some gold on your body or your throat or some of your chakras, and allow the sun or even the moonlight to hit this gold. And people have seen that it's really beneficial to do things like work with pure honey, that your, the cosmos can imprint raw honey with tons of beneficial information. And all these ancient ways are making a comeback as the people that are on this organic ascension timeline. We, as we remember how powerful we are, we start to remember the ancient ways that were basically just harnessing different abilities within ourselves. So it's one thing that is just making a comeback, how to use the elements the way they really were meant to be used, and just learning how to really have better relationships with other people, because we're working more on our own internal relationship.
While we're on the subject of Egypt and Atlantis, I remember from our tour in Egypt last year, I mean, just the number of gods that were depicted all over the place, and those gods some were human looking, others had bird heads or crocodile heads and so forth. I mean, are we talking? I mean, in ancient Egypt or in Atlantis, I mean, were there beings that were like hybrids, like beings that had humans that had bird heads. I mean, now we'd call them avians, or beings that had kind of reptilian-looking features that we'd call reptilians. Were these openly interacting with humanity back in the days of ancient Egypt or Atlantis?
Yes, it seems like they were. It seems like they were in people's memories. And it seems like that, well, there were hybrids that were part extraterrestrial, part human, it seems like. But there are also these extraterrestrials who basically had a light body, didn't have a full physical body until they came down to Earth. And when they came down to Earth, they masked themselves with a certain type of animal head. And what was interesting is they felt that at the time, whichever animal head they masked themselves with it corresponded to the area and it held certain qualities. Like, for instance, people remember like an extraterrestrial named Sobek with like a crocodile head. And he was very instrumental in teaching people how to build like the Kamambo temple. And people remember that he built this temple for humans, like especially for right now, where people are kind of learning about how to work on the shadow side of themselves and how to rebalance themselves. And there were certain hybrids that also were responsible for putting some of the codes inside some of the pyramids that were actually from Atlantean times. So many different things to that, just like the extraterrestrials that people remember with like cat-like faces. Cats were really revered in a lot of the ancient times, and there were a lot of reasons behind that. They understood that cats could totally protect the space. Anybody that has a cat now knows that your cat is probably energetically protecting you. And cats were revered in ancient times because they could act as messengers too. There were people that would be able to read the eyes of a cat, and they could actually use the cat as a messenger and could read it like an oracle could. So cats were used in that way in ancient Egypt. And because these benevolent extraterrestrials understood that, they showed up with cat faces, but they didn't actually have cat faces, some of them.
Okay. So you want to tell people about your website, or where they can find out more about what you're doing?
Sure, you can go to my website, theholistichehypnotist.com, and I will be opening some more Egypt trips. They sell out pretty fast, but I will be opening some soon, probably in June, and you can find out about my other retreats and the work that I do on my website. And I'll be speaking at Contact in the Desert soon, which is in May, and Mind Valley in May too.
Right, and of course on June 28th, you're going to be part of a panel discussion with me and George Cavassalis on the dilemmas of a Star Trek future. So I look forward to that. So I want to wish you well for your upcoming Egypt retreats, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Same, you too.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.